So it's a practice test. So the first one is how many and what type of solutions do the following have? So there's two ways to do this. One way is using a quadratic formula. If you do that and you end up with two normal numbers, and I'm not saying positive or negative fractions or any of that, I just mean if you actually get two answers, then it's two real solutions. If you get one answer, obviously that means one solution, but if you end up where your calculator gives you an error, that's when you have two imaginary solutions. You will never have one imaginary solution or three imaginary solutions. So make sure you're not writing that down. The other way to do this is use the discriminant. So the discriminant, this is your formula sheet you will have. The discriminant is this one right here, negative b over AC. Now, I give you this, but you have to remember, I'm not giving you the fact that if that discriminant is a positive answer, that means you get two real solutions. If the discriminant, that's two imaginary. One real solution. Again, you don't ever get one imaginary. It's either two real, two imaginary, or one real. The part you have to remember, make sure you memorize that. That's the quickest way to do this. And again, we don't actually care what the number is as long as it's positive, negative, or zero. So just like the quadratic formula, this is my A, my B, my C. A is 3, my B is 6, my C is 12. Negative 6 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses A parentheses times C. Parentheses when you plug numbers in. A very common mistake on the quiz. So this negative 6 squared ended up giving them a negative answer, and they got the wrong answer because of it. So make sure you use parentheses, but that is, sorry, negative 6 parentheses squared minus 4 times 3 times 12 gives me negative 108. Now, we don't care necessarily that it's 108. The biggest thing we care about is it's a negative. Since it's a negative, it is two imaginary solutions. Since that is a negative, it's two imaginary solutions. Now, we'll obviously double check to make sure you have the 108, so I know that you did it correctly. But really, the important thing isn't the 108, it's the fact that there are two imaginary solutions. If you want to use the quadratic formula, you can. I can see the merit to that. It takes a little longer, but at least then you don't have to worry about trying to figure out another equation, and you don't have to worry about trying to memorize that if it's a positive answer, it's two real, negative answer is two imaginary, zero is one real. I just use a quadratic. But the discriminant is a little bit quicker. So this one we have my A, B, and C. B squared minus 4 times A times C. When you multiply that all out or put it in your calculator, you're end up getting 0. So 0 is one real solution. Now, I didn't have an example of one that you get, but remember, if you get a positive when you do this, that is two real solutions. We are to do this, but I think the easiest way, since there's no x squared and x, I think the easiest way is to get the x all the x squared by itself. Now remember, since it's in parentheses, we can't get parentheses until we get rid of the squared. But we can't get rid of that square before we get rid of everything. So to do this problem, the first thing so you get 3 times 4x minus 6 equals 300. Get rid of that 3, divide both sides by 3. I get x minus 6 squared. Parentheses. Now again, before you do anything inside parentheses, I have to get rid of that squared, which means I need to take the square root. Now this is the one, since you're canceling out a squared, you need the plus. Also, if 100 is 10, a lot of people are just saying it is 100. At the very beginning, I'd need two answers because there's an exponent. two answers. It's a quadratic, and most of the time we get two answers for those. But remember, when you cancel out that square, that's the step that you put the plus or minus. Then from here you make two equations. 4x minus 6 is equal to 4x minus 6 is equal to negative 10. X is equal to plus 6. 4x is equal to negative 4. Divide both sides by 4. You get x is equal to negative 1. Remember, you could plug those in. Find the vertex of this. So remember, the vertex, your first step is finding the axis of symmetry. So you need your formula sheet, axis of symmetry. X is equal to negative 2 times A. So that's negative 2 times 2. Or that ends up giving me 4. So that is my axis of symmetry. That's not my vertex. Then to the rest of my vertex, back into the equation. Now, the reason I said the rest of my vertex is because that is part of your vertex. Remember, your vertex is an ordered pair, and I know that 4 is the x value. So I already found part of it. So on the other vertex, plug that in. 2 times 4 squared minus 16 times 4 plus 20. But here, just use your calculator. Don't make that harder than it has to be. That ends up giving you negative 12. Vertex, again, has to be an ordered pair. That is 4, negative 12. Parabola criteria, it has two. So it doesn't matter how you draw this parabola as long as that's what crosses your x-axis. So you can draw this. You can make one that is really a lot longer, as long as that doesn't pop up. Go this way. You can make one that is a lot. You can draw all those parabolas as long as it crosses at negative 4. When x is equal to 3, that means it touches that and then comes back. It doesn't cross, it just touches it. Your vertex is right there on your x. Not to get carried away, but it can also be really skinny, be really gradual, doesn't matter as long as that is where it's touching. And ones that just don't x-axis at all. So one like this, or 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 like this. Some of those I got carried away. This one for sure, that's not the right answer. But there are a lot of options as long as they don't cross your x-axis. All these go on forever. And so if you would draw one, this is more depth than I should. When I was just joking around, I drew this one. Technically, it doesn't look like it crosses, but yes, it does because you keep going. So it would cross there and there. I don't think you guys struggle with that, but just in case. Since I was being goofy, I figure I might as well tell you that or specify. So following using any method, the rates are 15. And so with number 8, it doesn't matter which one you use. We could solve by factoring. That is a different. So A is x, my b is 11. 11 is equal to 0. One of those is equal to 0. So what would you plug in to get 0 for the first one? Negative 11. What would you plug in to get 0 for the second one? Positive 11. So that's one way you can do it. In my opinion, the easier way is to x squared minus 121 is equal to 0. If you add 121 to both sides, x squared is equal to 1. Then you take squared, you take the square root, that cancels. The biggest thing, though, if you do it this way, remember that gives you plus or minus 11. Again, if it's squared, you need the plus or minus. The one thing you could do, and I would not recommend this, but I think you could use the quadratic formula for this one. Your A would be 2, your B would be negative 6, your C would be 0. I mean, you should be able to do that, but it goes a lot quicker if you remember you can use greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor between 2 and 6, x squared and x, you take out x. I by 2 is 1, 2 x's, I took 1 out, so 1 more left. 6 divided by 2 is 3, so that's about 3, and 1 x, I took it out, so 1 x is left. So what will make this part 0? Positive 3. We'll make this part 0. We'll multiply 2 to get 0. 0. And it's going to be like the greatest common factor. We don't add or subtract anything in that 2x. So it's going to just be 0. Number 10, so there is no leading coefficient for this one, so I would go ahead and try factoring. X squared minus 3x minus 20. Factor this, and you can't factor it, then you have to use the quadratic formula. Somebody on the quiz put prime for one of them. There are no prime. If you can't factor it prime, but we can still solve it with the quadratic formula. That's the whole reason we use that quadratic formula. Total factors of negative 40 that add up to negative 3. You need to list the factors of negative 40. Not a bad idea. 3 is 1, 4 is 10, 5 and 8. Numbers that multiply by negative 40 add up to negative 3 are this 5 and 8. We have to change the sign. 5 and negative 8. The whole reason I make you do this is to double check this. 5 times negative 8 is negative 40. 5 plus negative 8 is negative 3. Double check those signs. X plus 5 and x minus 8. Then you solve each one of these. So what will make 0 here? Will be negative. Right? What will make 0 for this one? Positive. Now again, if you're interested and you want, you could use the quadratic formula for that one. Your B would be negative 3, your C would be negative 4. If you want to see that, you can ask during class. But I'm going to use factoring for this one because we'll use quadratic for some of these other ones. So number 11, if we're being honest with each other, I would use quadratic formula for this. Anytime I have a leading coefficient, I think it's just as easy to use a quadratic formula as it is to do factoring. Now, if you're really factoring and you want to, you can. So this one I'm going to solve that way. So this one I'm going to solve by factoring. Times 3 is 13. Get 1 and 12, 6, 3 and 4. To be 13, or sorry, yeah, the ones that add up to 13 are 1 and 12. X plus 1, x plus 12. But remember, since we have a leading coefficient, we're not done yet. We have to divide both of those by 4. Is, sorry, jumped ahead of myself. 12 divided by 3. Whenever there is a fraction now, after you reduce, you move that denominator up front. So that's 4x plus 1, x plus 3. Negative 3, that's what makes that part 0. What makes it 0? If you can't tell, go ahead and solve it. Divide by 4. You end up getting 1 over 4. Where that's kind of a lot of work to do, so maybe the quadratic formula is easier than that. Excuse me. The main reason I use a quadratic formula is it seems like it's happened before where I tried to, and you work really hard at it, and you finally find out you can't factor, so then you have to do the quadratic formula. So I'm a little bit pro using a quadratic formula as much as possible, but again, ultimately, I want you guys to use whatever you're good at. So that quadratic formula is not a bad idea. The reason I'm not using it is because I will use it for number 13. Okay. Well, convenient. close it out and start over again. Sorry for wasting your time. Okay. Hey, we're back. Okay. And I would love to restart, but I'm already in it like 20 minutes, and I don't, probably not 20 minutes. I don't have the time for that or the energy. So number 12, again, for me personally, I would take the square root of all sides. That gives you x is equal to plus or minus 3. If you want to, x squared, you could subtract 9. That gives you x squared minus 9 is equal to 0, and you can use the difference of squares. Now, again, I don't think most of you guys are going to do it that way, but you could. Now, number 13, this is a good example of one that if you try to use factoring, couple things with this. 8x squared plus 6x, negative 25 plus 20 is negative 5. So one thing, if you try to use factoring, you get negative 40, factors of negative 40 that add up to be 6. That is 1, negative 1 and 40, negative 2 and 20, negative 4 and 10, negative 5 and 8. We already did this earlier. But any of those add up to 6? No, none of them do. So this one can't factor. So if you can't factor it, you have to use a quadratic formula. There's really no other option. So my A is 8, my B is 6, my C is negative 5. So I get my x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Make sure you use parentheses. Then some of you guys will just type that in your calculator and get your answer. That's fine. There's not super good at that, so I'm going to go step by step. So I have negative 6. In the denominator, I have 16. Then inside my square root, I have, and I just typed this in my calculator, parentheses 6 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 8 parentheses negative 5 parentheses. I get 196. Now 196, you can't reduce that down at all, and so that is your answer. Now if you're not sure, you could also just put your answer as a decimal. So in my calculator, I could type in negative 6 plus the square root of 196. That gives me 8, and then divide that by 16 is 0.5. And negative 6 minus the square root of 196. That gives me negative 20 divided by 16 gives me negative 1.25. So if you want to find the decimals instead, that's fine. Either way is good. So number 14. So I'm looking at my answer key. Okay, so I maybe changed my mind. I maybe said 13 you couldn't factor, and you maybe, okay, so I was wrong about number 13. Number 13, you could factor this one. Factors of negative 40 that add up to be 6. Oh, it was negative 4 and 10. So sorry, number 13, you could have factored that one. So I apologize about that. That's my mistake. But number 14, you cannot. So again, number 14, set it equal to 0. X squared minus 5 is equal to negative 9. Find both sides. 4x squared minus 5x. Math teacher, I should be able to do that in my head. Okay. This one is the one. Sorry, I mixed up 13 and 14. That's a negative 5. Negative 4. Sorry. Start with negative 1 and 44. Negative 2 and 22. 4, negative 4 and 11. 5 doesn't. 6 doesn't. 7, 8, 9, 10 don't. So 11 does, but we already have that. So which one of those? Negative 5. None of them do. So this is the one that you cannot use factoring with. we need to use a quadratic equation. Quadratic equation, b is negative 5 minus c is negative 11. X is equal to negative 5 plus or minus the square, negative 5 squared minus 4 2 times a. Oops, not 2. It's not a, it's 4. Now the biggest with this one on the quiz, a lot of people didn't use parentheses for this negative 5, and so that's what made them get the wrong answer. From here, now we can work stuff out. That's positive 5 plus or minus the square root or 8. This one is negative 5 squared. Sorry, parentheses, negative 5 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 4 parentheses parentheses negative 11 parentheses. That is 201. You cannot put in your calculator, or sorry, this one you cannot reduce unless you use decimals. So this is the one I was talking about. So this is 5 plus the square root of 201. That gives me 19.177 divided by 8 is 2.397 or 2.40. And then same thing, 5 minus the square root of 201 divided by 8 is negative 1.15. So not to jump back, but this one, I said you could leave this as your answer. I do not want that as your answer because actually, and you can leave the decimals as your answer, that's fine. But the square root of 196 is 14. I should have noticed that. And so that's where you get negative 6 plus 14 over 16 and negative 6 minus 14 over 16. And that's what's going to give you those answers. Negative 1/2 is one of them, and negative 5 over 4. Sorry, ran out of time, ran out of space. Or you could do it as the decimal like I did earlier. Doesn't make any difference for that one, but do not leave it as this one because you can still reduce it more without having a crazy weird decimal. Okay. Okay. Number 15, we can't do anything inside the square root until we get rid of this 4. So divide both sides by 4, and the square root of 2x minus 13 is equal to 11. Now to get rid of that square root, take both sides squared. We get 2x minus 13 is equal to 121. And now this one, we do not need plus or minus because this is not a quadratic. It's not squared anywhere, so we only get one answer. 2x is equal to 4. Divide both sides by 2. X is equal to 134 divided by 2 is 67. Okay, moving on. This one we'll get 2 answers because we have x squared. So the easiest way to do this one is we have to get the parentheses all by themselves first. So 675 divided by 3 is 225. Parentheses, I need to get rid of that squared. But remember, when you get rid of that squared, that's where you get the plus or minus. Then you get 225, not 225. The 2 answers. We have x plus 7 is equal to positive 15, the negative 15. So the answer gives you 8. The other answer gives you negative 22. The next one, graph the following parabola. Remember to 3 steps. The first step, find your axis of symmetry, which again is this out. We also have the quadratic formula in the formula sheet and the difference of squares if you decide to use it. positive 12 over negative 3. So if you want to, not a bad idea to go ahead and put a dotted line where your axis of symmetry is. Vertex. Negative 3, plug it back into where I'm going. So negative 3 squared minus 12 times negative 3 minus 13. And again, for me, I just type that in exactly how I see it. That way you don't have to worry about order of operations or anything crazy. Just make sure you're using your parentheses. That ends up giving me 5. So my vertex is negative 3, 5. So negative 3, 5 is right here. Then is making our table. So on our table, the number is a vertex, negative 3, 5. I want the two numbers that are right below negative 3, so it's negative 4, negative 5, and the two numbers that are right above, so negative 2, negative 1. If you have those flip-flopped, that's fine as well. And then all we do is put these numbers into your original equation. Scroll up so I can see. Negative 2 times negative 5 squared minus 12 times negative 5 minus 13. I have negative 2 times negative 4 squared minus 12 times negative 4 minus 13. I have the same thing with negative 2, negative 1. So all you do is put that in your calculator. So negative 2 parenthesis negative 5 parenthesis squared minus 12 parenthesis negative 5 parenthesis minus 13. That gives me negative 1. Now again, remember, once you have it in your calculator once, you should be able to go back and select that last equation and then put in the new numbers. So I'm just going to go put in negative 4 for these. Now again, I know some of you guys are going to do the shortcut 3 with the negative 2 and the negative 1, but I think it's a good idea to do the work to check it. In my calculator, I'm putting negative 2. So I plug. That gave me positive 3, so that means we're on the right track. And then plug it in, gives you negative 3. So you definitely are on the right track for this one. So when we graph this, negative 4 goes up 1, 2, 3. Negative 5 goes down 3, 1, 2, 3. Negative 2 goes up 3, and negative 1 goes down to 5. And so my parabola ends up looking like this. Work, but too bad. Number graphing, so I'm going to add 5 and need to have it equal to 0. This just like axis of symmetry. So negative 6 over 2 is 3. And then my second step is, so it is 8 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 5. So if you do that, that is so my vertex is at 3, negative 4. And step, again, now we're finding that. Here's my chart. I have 3, 4, and vertex, that's in the middle. 2 smaller, 2 and 1, 2 number 4 and 5. And then you just plug that into your equation. 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 5. Squared minus 6 times 2 plus 4 squared minus 6 times 4 plus 5, and 5 squared minus 6 times 5 plus 5. So again, I encourage you to put all those in your calculator. Too long. Plug in 1, 0, 2, 3, and if you plug, but again, it's a good idea to double check and actually plug them in. So 2, -3 is right here, 4, -3, and 1, 0, 5, 0. So be careful. People forget. What can they forget? That's the graph, but I'm asking. So you have to go back and double check where does it cross your axis? Well, it crosses at 1 and 5. Now again, you probably saw that when you were doing your chart, but I still want to see the graph on that one. And the last is on top of a building that is 30 feet tall. The equation to model this scenario is find the maximum height. So that's going to be, and the amount of time. Maximum height, again, anytime maximum, we're talking about the vertex. So find the vertex, the axis of symmetry, 55, -50, 32. Sorry, my calculator's messing up. 1.72. So I write 2 decimal places, 1.72. But that's not your answer. We need to find the vertex. So plug that back in, just like we did with the graphing problem. 2 squared plus 55 times 1.72 plus 30. In your calculator, you end up getting technically 1.72 and 77.27, but the maximum height is that 77.27. This is how much time it takes to get this 1.7 seconds to get to that maximum height, but they don't ask that it's in the air before it hits the ground. That is how you're using the quadratic formula. So B is 50, C. We plug those numbers in. Plus or minus the square 55 squared minus 4 times A C all over 2 times A. Now again, if you put that in your calculator exactly how you see it, that's fine. Just make sure with these story problems, make sure you actually find the decimals. But I still do it in 2 steps. 55 squared minus 4 times -16 times 30 is 4945. And this is what I type in. So -55 plus square root of 4945. Hit enter to see what that is, and then divide that by -32. You have to do that, or your order of operations will be wrong. That is -0.48. And same thing, -55 minus the root of 4945, and then divide that by -32. Now again, if you just put it all in your calculator like this with the fraction button, or even this one, you could put as a fraction button. If your calculator doesn't have a fraction button, that's when you have to make sure you do the order correctly. So I do the top part, hit enter, and then divide it. Answer, but it can't be the negative answer, so it's got to be 3.92 seconds. Sorry that was so long, and sorry that I messed up number 13 pretty bad, and I'm sorry I had technical difficulties in the middle. I would have re-recorded it, but I'm pretty lazy. If you have any questions, make sure you let me know.